Hello and good afternoon. My name is Bart Erbij. I work at ELAT, but today I'm your host in the CharIN Tuesday Europe. We're going to discuss some plug-in charging activities which are deployed in Europe at the moment. For this, we have a panel. First, some presentations. The first is by Bonyat Satyev from P3 Automotive Consulting. Then Joe Mata of Vedicom will tell something about the deployment and the successes we can look forward to in deploying plug and charge. And also a third initiative by Jean-Marc Rive from GREV will be told about the task force PKI he is in. After these three presentations, we'll have a panel discussion, of course, with the three presenters, but also with two additions, Christian Hahn from Hubject and Baran Yalchin from ThinkPlus. But first, I would like also to introduce my co-host, Klaas Braklau, co-host. He's the chair, of course, of CharIN. Welcome, Klaas.
So here I am, Bart. Thanks for the nice introduction. And on behalf of CharIN, I like to welcome everybody who has dialed in on this quite interesting subject of plug and charge in those times. Many thanks to Bart to give the moderation for today. Thanks to the speakers for their presentations from different views. So that is always important. We are all serving the customer, but there are always different views. And I'm happy that CharIN helps to assist with its organizational structure to define a system where free competition is possible. We can all participate. And at the end, we are all slaves of our customers. If we are doing a good job, the customer is happy. If the customer is happy, so we hopefully can make some business out of that. And so that is to driving technology, electromobility, convenience to the customer. That is a perfect setting. And I would like to thank to Christian as well, because he is currently the only one who is having an operational public key infrastructure plug and charge in place. And hopefully we can get, by collecting all our expertise together, to a solution which is feasible to bring Europe a step forward. And that would be the blueprint for the further world rollout. So we have some obligation to have a good performance in Europe, and I wish us all good controversial discussions and giving you the participants the opportunity to ask whatever you want. You have all the experts ready who are necessary to give that honest answers. So back to you, Bart. Thanks for stepping in for that. And I know you're a passionist on that. I remember when we met in the Allianz Arena, it's 100 years ago or 200. And from that time, so we are doing the rest most virtually. And I'm sure we can come back to the physical meeting again. And I like to work together with you. And thanks again for being our moderator.
Well, my pleasure. I also look forward in real life sessions with you, Klaas, but also with all the other participants. Of course, it feels much more comfortable to see a presenter on stage and ask him a direct question. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But if you have questions regarding the presentations or towards the panelists, feel free to address them in the chat. It's not raising your hand and asking the question live, but it's a second best, and we must cope with it. Looking forward to those live presentations on the CharIN Tuesday by CharIN, maybe in September or this fall. So please chat with us with your questions. For now, before we start the presentations, there is a little movie which is made to introduce the topic. Mrs. Muller, may you start the movie, please?
Electric vehicles are on the rise, and with the industry's rapid expansion, charging stations are needed to support such massive growth. Currently, charging your car involves various methods requiring identification such as credit cards, RFID cards, or apps on your phone. This can be inconvenient and frustrating for a lot of users. Fortunately, with the new charging feature, Plug and Charge, the customer can enjoy a more reliable and simplified charging process. Plug in, charge, and hit the road again. It's that easy. The ISO 15118 protocol allows automatic identification, authentication, and authorization at any charging point by using certificate-based communication. Your electric vehicle ID and e-mobility service contract are exchanged between your car, the charge point operator, and the e-mobility service provider, enabling an automatic and seamless billing process. The entire data exchange is secured and trusted by IT certificates defined by experts within the CharIN community. Now, customers don't need to worry whether the next charging station will accept an app or RFID card because external identification is no longer necessary, making charging your vehicle as easy as charging your phone. Plug and Charge. Charging your EV has never been so simple. This technology is supported and established by the CharIN community.
Well, what a bright future lays ahead, but we're not there yet. So please, Bonyat, you made a presentation for us which steps should be taken the coming month and years. May I give the platform to you?
Thank you very much, Bertel, for the introduction. Just a quick question. Was it only me? I had no audio on the video, or did no one else hear anything?
I had, so it works.
Okay, then it was just me. Perfect. But I watched the video before, so I guess I know still what happens there. So welcome everyone. My name is Bonyat Satwat from the Management Consultancy P3 Group. I have the great honor to manage the CharIN Plug and Charge Euro project and to present it today to you. Therefore, when we jump to the next slide, I would like to give a quick introduction and background information regarding the technology behind Plug and Charge, but also regarding the market situation and our motivation for this project for those who are not too familiar with the technology and the current circumstances. Then I will present you the project framework as well as the scope and objectives of the CharIN Plug and Charge Euro project. And I would close the presentation with a timeline reviewing the status quo and the next steps of the project. So let us start with the next slide, please. So I hope everyone could follow the video and had some audio. So the big question here is, how can the operation of Plug and Charge regarding the transfer of data between the vehicle and the charging station and all other instances be conducted securely? The answer is public key infrastructure, PKI, as Mr. Bracco already mentioned. So PKIs are being used, for example, when browsing securely on the internet for digital signatures and documents, or for example, for secure accessing the corporate Wi-Fi or VPN. So similar to that, the authentication is conducted by certificates which are issued by a certificate authority. The V2G root CA, so the V2G root certificate authority, is the highest trust anchor in the PKI tree you see on the right side. It signs the subordinate certificate authorities. So for Plug and Charge, this PKI tree is defined in the ISO 15118, as you can see in the image on the right-hand side. When you jump to the next slide, I would give you a quick look of the current market situation to just understand our project's motivation a bit better. So currently there is only one V2G route in Europe and in place, which is operated by a private company. This may lead to multiple V2G route certificate authorities entering the market in order to meet the differentiating demands of the market. So furthermore, Plug and Charge has a rather small market footprint right now, with only few players offering Plug and Charge functionality at the very moment. Especially with regards to a scenario with multiple V2G routes, we are facing a few risks and potential issues. So, for example, the vehicle storage is limited with space for only 5 V2G routes, as defined in ISO 15118. This could lead to numerous isolated non-interoperable solutions, leading to a segregation of the market, for example. Furthermore, that scenario comes in connection with higher costs, as well as technical, and with that, obviously, also with higher risk of technical issues. So eventually, this could decrease the market acceptance of Plug and Charge, having all those risks in place. If you go to the next slide, please. So what is our solution to that? We think that a single European route certificate authority, which provides a fair and open solution, operated by an organization which is neutral and accepted by all market players, could minimize most risks, costs, and complexity, and with that lead to an accelerated market rollout of Plug and Charge with increasing business opportunities. So we think that a single European route certificate could be the answer, but it has to be obviously operated by an organization that is accepted by the whole market in the best case. If you go to the next slide. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce to you our project. This is kind of why the CharIN Association as a non-profit organization has been identified as by a group of cross-industry companies as the organization to operate the route certificate authority. The project team consists of 15 companies, including charge point operators, OEMs, mobility operators, and charge station manufacturers, as you see also here on the right side. But further members are about to join, and it's generally open for every company that is ready to commit to the project. Currently, we have sprint meetings with smaller groups twice a week, while more crucial decisions are made in full group meetings. So if this seems interesting for your company, feel free to contact me afterwards also to ask for more information. Maybe you will become the next member of our project team. The next slide, please. Then furthermore, I would like to present you a summary of our objectives and key results we defined for this project. We are striving, as already mentioned, for a single European V2G route CA. This does not mean that we are not also preparing for a potential scenario of multiple V2G routes. So we are also considering a scenario of multiple V2G routes, but our main goal is to have just one single European V2G route in place. As already mentioned, the CharIN PKI will be independent, open, fair, and secure, providing a level playing field for all market players. So how do we reach this? The CharIN PKI is governed by cross-industry players, as you've seen, and therefore expected to be accepted by all industries. Furthermore, we are looking to implement a solution which is working for all electric vehicles, charging stations, and mobility services, while considering existing solutions and the respective migration as well as integration of our solution with minimal disruptions and efforts. The next slide, please. So to be a bit more concrete about our project content, you see it here. And our project activities, you can find here an overview on the left-hand side of our current scope. Obviously, this is just a summary. So the main content and activity is the setup and operation of the V2G route certificate authority and also a subordinate certificate authority. For that, we need to also define and implement the integration and onboarding processes regarding new participants which want to join or also migrate from the old PKI kind of to the CharIN PKI. Before we can dive, interoperability tests and end-to-end tests need to be performed. This includes also the challenging of defined use cases by the task force PKI, which will be elaborated a bit more in detail during one of the next presentations by Jean-Marc Rive. So finally, we will define an operational model which includes the cost coverage and the governance body for the CharIN PKI. As mentioned, CharIN is a non-profit organization, which means that we are looking to minimize the participation fee with the need to only cover the emerging costs for operating the PKI. Furthermore, we have also, of course, regular discussions on extending the project scope. So depending on the market development, the setup and implementation of further subordinate certificate authorities which issue the leaf certificates, for example, could be included in the future. The same applies for other plug-and-charge services which are outside of the PKI, as long as the need for CharIN as operator is identified. Furthermore, we are elaborating and defining the need for a commercial guideline for the plug-and-charge ecosystem, including the PKI, but also the operation of further services such as directory services or certificate pools, which should be addressed on EU level in a further step. So we are planning or defining right now also to have a set of rules or recommendations set by the industry, of course, and address those also on EU level to have them implemented kind of on the whole European Union. The next slide, please. And with that, the last slide, I would like to give you a short overview of our timeline. Please, the next slide. Thank you very much. So initiated in autumn of last year of 2020 with the first alignment call, the project was then kicked off in March 2021, so just a couple of months old. In the following month, after the publication of the RFP for the PKI, we are currently evaluating the submitted proposals and planning to select the solution in late July. So we are currently evaluating the PKI proposals that we have received by the different vendors and are in the current process of evaluating those and selecting kind of the final provider for our PKI. Then in the following month, we will define and implement the required processes, so for onboarding or for the integration of the PKI, and conduct the onboarding, of course, for the first participants and run with them some tests. Once this is done, the market implementation and rollout will be started with a piloting phase. So still we are really enthusiastic, or I am at least still enthusiastic, that we will be able to pilot plug and charge already this year and roll out the whole functionality from then on. And this is kind of my presentation for you, and a small and brief of the Plug and Charge Europe project. Thank you a lot for your attention, and I hope I didn't confuse too many of you. Otherwise, obviously, feel free to ask your questions, not only now, but also afterwards. You're always welcome to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bonyat, for the presentation. I can imagine some of the participants in this webinar have some questions. They haven't addressed them yet in the chat, but please feel free to address them in the chat, and we can talk about your questions in the panel discussion. For now, thank you very much. We'll see you in, I think, 3/4 of an hour in the panel. I would like to give the floor to the next presentation, which is done by Joe Mata from Vedicom. Please, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Bart. My name is Joe. I will be presenting the Mobena Initiative, which I'm leading on behalf of Vedicom. I'll be talking about some background about the Mobena Initiative and specifically the actions we are doing towards the successful rollout, the successful deployment of Plug and Charge. So next slide, please. Yeah, just a couple of words. I'm part of the Vedicom organization. Vedicom is a private-public partnership. It's a foundation. It's an institute for research institute, the mobility domain, the large scope of mobility domain, and specifically in the electrical mobility and the charging systems. Next slide. At Vedicom, we are working in this domain since almost 6 or 7 years now, and we are working closely with professional organizations that you see on this slide, representing the actors in the French market, the e-mobility actors. And in 2020, we decided to create the Mobena Initiative based on assessments that we shared together in the ecosystem. First of all, there's the assessment that we need to go forward improving the user experience with new services such as Plug and Charge, but not only Plug and Charge. And second, there's the adoption of the ISO 15118 standard that will enhance technically the framework for communication in the electromobility ecosystem, but also is the enabler for these new services. Interoperability is key. So when we talk about the standards, there's a standard itself, but there's the question about interoperability around the standard. How can we implement it? How can we make sure it's interoperable? What kind of testing we should do, and so on. And the final point is that we need technical and organizational framework, the ecosystem, to allow this open fair market for every user and operator to select their providers. So with that in mind, we decided collectively with our ecosystem that we need a collective action, coordinated action to work towards a harmonized deployment that can ensure interoperability in an open and fair market. This is when we created Mobena with this committee. So move to the next slide. These organizations are part of our initiative committee, the Mobena Initiative Committee. Vedicom is the coordinator of this initiative, and then we asked the industrial partners to join in. The list you see here is the list that was created in summer 2020. Right now we are widening the scope. Mobena is open to new partners, and yeah, in around September you'll be hearing about a new project that we'll be launching within Mobena with a slightly different list of partners regarding what you see on the slide right now. So next slide. This action within the Mobena, what are we aiming for, and how are we organizing ourselves towards the deployment? The idea is to have coordinated action to work with will be always around 20 or 25 partners in this initiative, working together towards not only Plug and Charge, but also we'll talk about smart charging, all the services coming with the ISO 15118 standard. We are organized in a 2 years project that will be launched in September 2021, in a couple of months now. And the goal is to work towards a generalized adoption of Plug and Charge in the French market by 2023 or 2024. To achieve that, we go from our starting point is that the standards, we have the standards, we have ISO 15118 that will be rolled out soon, but ISO 15118 itself is not enough. There is a global framework that needs to be adopted. There is a question of interoperability, so we need interoperability guides, we need testing processes, we need to define how we can implement, test all the services that coming with 15118, specifically around not only the 15118 itself, but all the services of 15118, which implies also other standards and communication protocols, not only between the EV and the charging station, but also in the backend, and work together towards the rollout roadmap and the coordination at pilot sites to start progressively installing in the market these new services. Within this project, we talk about interoperability, testing processes, but there's also the bigger framework about the PKI. This is what Bonyat also presented before. Around the 15118, there is the big question of the PKI. How can we structure the PKI solutions? The position at Mobena, we are working for the rollout of the solutions. We are not building a PKI, so the Mobena vision is to rely on market solutions for ISO 15118 PKI that are consistent with the vision Mobena has about what a PKI should be, how shall it be managed, governed in order to allow this open and fair market. Next slide, please. So in this scope, we believe at Mobena that we need to evaluate, study, propose solutions for the PKI architecture, the PKI framework. So we are taking part, we are involved since a few years now at Vedicom. We are involved in these demonstrations, implementations, testing of PKI architecture options. So you see on the right-hand side of this slide, the four main options for deploying a PKI for plug and charge. But let me be clear here, these solutions are not specific for plug and charge. These are quite standard solutions, having one PKI, of course, having cross recognition between V2G routes, between PKIs, cross certification or certificates trust list. All solutions are standard, used for the internet, used for CITS, used for many other topics involving cybersecurity. And what we are studying here is how can they be implemented for the plug and charge, for the ISO 15118 services, which modifications they might imply to the standard itself, and how can we adopt them, in which specific maybe framework to adopt them in the plug and charge. But of course, the idea is to reuse much as possible from the standard implementation. To make the link with what CharIN is doing, what Bonyat just presented, the Plug and Charge Europe project is set to be a PKI operator, maybe set to be the PKI operator. It's still a question mark at this point. If also understood correctly from Bonyat's presentation, but maybe we can talk about this later in the roundtable, the panel. However, at the point that we started these discussions and these evaluations, we believe that there might be a solution with one PKI, quite complex to put in place, not to become a monopoly with some specific governance that needs to be in place to make sure it's neutral and open and so on. It's maybe feasible, but maybe it's not, and maybe it might be not only for simple reasons like multiple actors just emerge in the market, and yeah, we have to deal with this. So looking forward for rolling out the plug and charge, not to find ourselves in blocking situations where interoperability cannot be achieved. We are anticipating the situation of having multiple V2G routes in the market, multiple PKIs. So we are focusing lots of our efforts, specifically technical efforts, implementing demonstrating, evaluating technical solutions for interoperability between multiple V2G routes, multiple PKIs in the plug-in charge market. Next slide. Yeah, so I'll focus a bit about one of the solution, the certificate trust list, because it was the latest one we worked on. It's the latest one we demonstrated less than a month ago on the 2nd of June. Well, this work is not only done within the Mobena initiative, within the Vidicom and Mobena. We are also associated with international partners from outside the Mobena partnership, from Europe, the US, Israel, also led by our main partners, ELAD, and Hubject, who were the two other hosts of this demonstration. Actually, this demonstration was held in 3 different locations simultaneously at the same time. With one of the demonstrations was done at Vidicom, the other one at ELAD and at Hubject. And we associated 3 PKIs, 3 V2G routes. We demonstrated how technically we can achieve interoperability in different scenarios. Just as what you see on the left-hand side of the screen is a small illustration of what a trust list is and how can it work in one specific scenario. So what you see written CTL is actually a list of V2G root certificates. So it's the list of trust. What are the V2G root operators that the devices can trust? Such a list can be held by a trust list manager, shall be in neutral governmental operator, probably. And when we hold this list needs to be installed in the devices. So when we say device, it's the EV, obviously, it's what we see in the screen, but it's also on the infrastructure side at the charging station, or the operator behind the charging station should also be aware of the list of trust, the list of the V2G routes that they can trust. At the demonstration, we studied and we evaluated technically different scenarios. How can we install this list into the EV using the backend of the OEM? How to install it in the infrastructure? How to enroll a new operator into the certificate trust list. We reused the concept used in the CITS, the V2X communication from the automotive V2X communication. We also evaluated how to get this list into the device, into the EV or the charging station. We evaluated different possibilities to install it into the EV directly, or that the OEM telematics can extract the V2G routes and send them one by one to the EV. Well, the kind of work we did and demonstrated together with 17 partners here, it's not, again, not only us, ourselves, Vidicom, not Mobena itself alone, neither. It's a collaborative work with several partners, because interoperability is really the key point, and it's important to show and to work together to achieve this kind of work and this kind of interoperability between the plug and charge for the plug and charge services. And we evaluated the different scopes, the different scenarios, and we studied what kind of impact they have on the already existing standards, ISO 118, OCPP, and so on. Where we are at today, if we move to the next slide. Where we are at today and what we are looking forward to. First, Mobena keeps being engaged towards this work about interoperability. A lot of focus on interoperability between, in the case of multiple V2G routes, as I said, in the certificate trust list, for example. This was the latest that we demonstrated that it's feasible. This joint work, not only within Mobena, but with other international partners such as ELAD, Hubject, IOTECA, so on. There's many others. I didn't put the full list here. Will continue. We are engaged to continuing this collaboration. We are also engaged in working with CharIN, specifically with the CharIN task force also, which is writing an interoperability document. Jean-Marc Reeves will talk about it in a minute. So it's very important to us to coordinate with what the CharIN task force is working on. The second point I want to emphasize is that the Mobena is in action towards the rollout of the plug and charge and of the ISO 15118. So it's very important to move forward with the solutions. So we are very happy to coordinate with the CharIN Plug and Charge Europe, who will be one or the PKI operator. It's important to have PKI operators to move forward on the rolling out of the solutions. And we promote the development of interoperability solutions because we believe that it's a very likely possibility to find ourselves with multiple V2G routes. So we need to prepare this possibility. And the last point, we are involved as Vedicom, but also on behalf of the Mobena Initiative, the European Commission subgroup on governance and standards, where such decisions or orientations at least will be taken, and we are happy to be part of it and to provide the knowledge we have, the experiments we have, and to learn also from all the partners that we are meeting in this subgroup. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Joe, for your presentation. And in the presentation, we already had some questions from you towards the other panelists. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussion in a few minutes. Again, to the attendees, feel free to also address questions towards Joe. For now, I would like to give the floor to the third speaker, Mr. Jean-Marc Reeves from CharIN. Jean-Marc, floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Could you hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you. So my name is Jean-Marc Reeves. I'm from CharIN, but today I'm talking to you on behalf of CharIN, but also AFIREV and the PFA, which is the French automotive platform. And so I will try to explain you the topic and the work we are doing on the task force PKI. Next slides, please. So today, we were a bit focused on the plug and charge feature, but plug and charge feature is one of the element, a very important feature about the EV driver and how to use the charging infrastructure and so on. But we think that the electromobility is now at the stage of scaling up, and there are some challenges and some improvement that the electromobility must do now about in order to be able to scale up. The first one is about security in terms of authentication, authorization, transaction management, and also payment management. And security will be a very important point that we need to improve for the next months, next years. The second point is about the integration of the mobility domain into the energy sector and vice versa. And we know that if we want to be able to deploy massively the electromobility, we need to work about this integration. This integration is about smart charging, but also about energy flexibility management. And you know that integration with the grid and the electric system means also improve the security itself, as I said, because the electromobility infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, could be an entry point for cyber attacks in entry points in the grid. And so for this reason, the integration of mobility into the energy domain, energy sector, has also to be secured, and the cybersecurity is very important. For sure, we need also to improve cost reduction, cost of the charging session, charging infrastructure also, and in order to reduce the cost, we need to improve the standardization of all the elements that are necessary for the ecosystem. And we needing standardization means also interoperability in order to be sure that any actors could work with any other actors. So in the next slide, you will see that we think that ISO 15118 is a very good opportunity about in order to improve those key elements. And so sometimes the point is the ISO 15118 the best choice? I don't know, but this is today's opportunity to improve security, to improve integration in the energy domain, to improve standardization, and we have to pay attention to the interoperability point. So plug and charge is part of the ISO 15118, but ISO 15118 has a very large scope and could be a key point in the scaling up of the electromobility. In the next slide, we will see that the ISO 15118 is focused on the communication between the vehicle and the grid, and typically with the charging station. But this is, if the ISO 15118 is focused on that, the key point is that this part is only a small part of the whole ecosystem for electromobility. And if we want to deploy ISO 15118 or plug and charge and so on, we need to pay attention at the whole ecosystem, not only on the communication between vehicle and grid, but how to manage those features regarding the EMSP perspective, or OEM, or CPO, or energy, or and so on, or PKI actors. So the rollout of ISO 15118 need to be integrated at an ecosystem level, not only on the grid to vehicle to grid communication. And to be able to deploy, we need to define some common point of view, so common definition about how to work together. I mean, EMSP, CPO, OEM, and so on. All the actors need to define a common framework. And this framework is not only technical things, but also in terms of governance. And PKI is a typical example of this cross-domain question with a beginning in the communication between vehicle and grid, but with impacts on the whole ecosystem. On the next slide, we will see that this question of defining common framework could be split in three main areas. One is about delivering certificate, issuing certificates, and on this point, we try to define and we define a certificate policy to clarify that. So this point is how to define the PKI features and the PKI roles and contribution and governance in order to have a common framework about that. The second area is about interoperability. Interoperability means the fact that every system, every player could be in relationship with any other. The third area is about governance and market rules. And to manage those three main topics in terms of common definition, common framework definition, the CharIN organization proposed to define the task force PKI, which is a working group, an open working group hosted by CharIN, but open. It accepts any other player, and not only CharIN members. And this working group aims to define common frameworks in terms of security, in terms of technology and technical integration, and also in governance. And so this working group is active since 1.5 years, something like that, and we have a weekly meeting, weekly workshop with between 10 and 20 regular contributors, and coming from various sectors, from all sectors of industry sectors, for sure, automotive, energy, services, I mean, as EMSP, CPOs, and so on, electromobility services, and also security, cybersecurity, and for sure cybersecurity in terms of PKI actors. And in the next slide, you will see that about the first area, I mean issuing certificates, the task force PKI already released a document at the end of last year in November, something like that, about the certificate policy. The certificate policy is a document that describes how to issue certificates. I mean, about governance, but also about technical things and process and tools. And on the task force PKI, we define a guidelines for certificate policy. This is a very important document in order for any actor that want to become a PKI actor to take that document, these guidelines, as an input to define its own certificate policy. So this is a set of requirements, technical and process requirements, in order to operate a PKI and to be able to deliver, to issue certificates. This document has been already released last year and is fully accessible, publicly accessible on the CharIN website. On the next slide, we will see that the second area about interoperability is the current topic on which we are working now since the end of last year. And the way we work about that is by analyzing the use cases, and we define a big list of use cases. I will show you a small summary of this list. So we listed use cases, and we define how systems in this ecosystem could work together in order to deliver the services about the plug and charge, but all the other services attached to the ISO 15118 and typically about around the PKI. And so we analyze those use cases, and we deliver a list of actors and role, modeling of actors and role. We also listed some key business objects, and we define some triggers and events, and also the data flows. So how all those actors and roles exchange information and in order to deliver services. Based on this overall system architecture, we have to define some implementation guidelines, and we are typically in this switch from the use case analysis in order to be able to describe to EMSP CPOs, pool managers, PKI actors, car maker, and so on, how to integrate their system, how to define, to develop, to design their system, and to be sure that they will be interoperable. So in this job, in this activity, we have two main focuses. The first one is about interoperability, and interoperability is the ability of two systems to cooperate. And today we are not talking about only two systems, but big numbers of systems in an ecosystem. And so the interoperability guideline is a set of requirements of proposition, definition that ensure that any player that will implement those guidelines will be interoperable with any other players implementing the same guidelines. So this is a very key element to deploy the ISO 15118 and also typically for sure the plug and charge. The second focus that we are focused on is about prevent any monopoly situation. We try to define a full description of and guidelines that ensure that any role involved in this ecosystem could be played by several players, by one or several players. And this is for sure the situation with the MSPs, with CPOs that are we have hundreds of and maybe thousands of CPOs at the MSP, but also for actors like pool manager, but also PKI actors, and we are in line with what we saw previously with Joe, for example, with number of PKI actors, but also pool manager, CPS actors, all the PKI detailed roles that are involved in the plug and charge feature. For sure, with several car makers, but this is already a de facto situation. On the next slide, we will see the rapid example, rapid summary of the use case that we are working about. Just to, we will not enter in detail with each one, but just to show you that there is the EV perspective, the EMSP side, the CPS perspective, the charging point, and so on. So we try to define all the use cases that could be implemented in the whole ecosystem around the plug and charge, and a bit more, a bit larger for the ISO 15118 deployment. On the next slide, I will try to summarize what we saw and what the contribution of the CharIN Task Force PKI. The CharIN Task Force PKI is shown in this slide on the top right side of the slide, and you see that the main deliverables of this task force, this working group, is about the certificate policy, which is already delivered, and the interoperability guidelines. And this working group is focused on technical guidelines to ensure interoperability. You can see just below that CharIN Task Force PKI, the STF subgroup. The STF subgroup is a working group managed by the European Commission under the umbrella of the STF, Sustainable Transport Forum. And the topic of this, the goal of this working group is to highlight, clarify, and I hope to define some governance framework about the ISO 15118 and typically the plug and charge feature. You can see also on the left side the Mobena Initiative, and as GRF and also PFA and FRF, we are part of the Mobena Initiative, and the Mobena Initiative is more focused on deployment. So how to roll out the plug and charge and the ISO 15118, and Joe explained that perfectly. And I'm in charge also of the liaison between the CharIN Task Force PKI and the Mobena Initiative, in order to be sure that all the ideas, suggestion, contribution of Mobena are clearly pushed in the Task Force PKI, but symmetrically that what we will define on the Task Force PKI will be implemented in the Mobena Initiative. So this liaison is very active in order to be sure that all these two initiatives are fully in the same, push the things in the same direction toward the same target. The last initiative is on this slide, on the top left side, is the Plug and Charge Europe, and Bonyat told us some points about that. This is also an initiative on the deployment side, how to deploy, to roll out, and this focus on the PKI point. And so just to summarize that, we can see that in the Task Force PKI, we are focused on the guidelines, interoperability guidelines, but we are fully in line with those three other initiatives in order to push in the same direction toward the same target, which is the deployment and the rollout of the ISO 15118 and typically the plug and charge feature. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Thank you very much for your extensive presentation and the overview how the different initiatives interact. Now the clock is at 4 o'clock, so we have some more time for a little panel discussion. Maybe a brief introduction. Jean-Marc and Joe and Panja just introduce themselves, but we have 2 more panelists. Maybe the next slide. Yes, please. Christian Haan and Baran Yalcin. Christian, maybe a very brief introduction, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is Christian from Hubject. And as you just have heard, I'm having the pleasure leading Hubject as a company. And as you may know, we are already operating a productive V2G UCA. And therefore, we are more than happy to be present today to share our lessons learned and best practices with the audience today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Also, a new face in this panel is Baran Yalcin. May you introduce yourself shortly?
Sure. Actually, I'm a former Hubject employee. Hi, Christian. I started to work in plug-in charge project in Volkswagen Group, actually building for OEM CA. Then supported to build Hubject ecosystem. Now I'm supporting CharIN Group to build a plug-in charge PKI.
Super, welcome. And maybe the 3 presenters also can switch their camera on. Bonyat, Joe, and of course Jean-Marc. Well, we had a presentations and we had a brief movie. Maybe attendees in this webinar have some questions. I can't see them in the chat yet, but feel free to reach out to us. I have some questions myself. Starting with Bonyat, you had a presentation where there was a focus on, in the end, 1 certificate route. Can you explain it a little bit? Because the other 2 presentations were a bit afraid of a monopoly or a dominance. What are your thoughts on that remarks?
Yes, I fully understand the concerns of my colleague regarding the monopoly, and in general, at least I don't consider the CharIN PKI as a monopoly, since at least it's not a classic monopoly, or it would not be a classic monopoly, let's say it like this, if it should be the only one on the market, since it's really governed by various companies. So it's not only led by OEMs or only by CPOs. So we have really a variety of companies defining the processes and also implementing, and in the next step also governing the CharIN PKI. So from my perspective, it's not a classical monopoly, I would say, and therefore I would not have any concerns, let's say. And since I'm managing, this project, I have a really good feeling about it, because I think we have, obviously it's not always easy to have all those different interests consolidated, and having an aligned, let's say, decision on all the topics. But that's why we are here for, and that's why we want like an accepted and neutral organization. So from my perspective, it's not like 1 company on the market, but more like right now, like 15 at least opinions that are looking on everything that at least I do on this project to kind of prevent monopoly. And with that, I kind of agree with the colleagues that we also don't want a classic monopoly, and that's why we kind of founded or initiated this project within CharIN.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, but this is a panel discussion, so maybe Baran, I see you smiling. You probably have some remarks on this statement.
Sure, I want to agree first with Bonyat, and I want to say in the project group, there is no intention to build one V2G root CA and lobby against all the others. So it's a free market. Anybody can build a V2G root. I just checked this morning how many trusted root CAs are there in Mozilla Foundation. It was 147. So it's not a very special thing to have a root CA. So anybody can build. But what we are facing here is if we have too many root CAs only in European market, it's going to be a huge chaos for everyone, not only for OEMs, but also CPOs and also mobility service providers. So the project idea is, what if at the beginning, currently there's only one root CA in the market. What if at the beginning we can agree on one root CA? And also I want to mention this is very important. We are focusing only the root itself and the first level sub CAs. So anybody can operate sub 2 level. The project doesn't want to operate and produce leaf certificates. So I think a non-profit organization, CharIN, with so many members, I think this is the right base to start on. And anybody can produce and sell or use leaf certificates from sub 2 CAs they can get from CharIN.
Maybe I can add some comments from my side. And
yes, I was just
thank you, Bart.
Trying to adjust you, Christian.
Thank you, Bart. Very kind of you. Yeah, I think as my two colleagues in the panel already talked about a kind of monopolistic situation, I think it would be good to also share a bit the object perspective, because maybe we are the one you are having in mind when you talk about monopoly. I think what we need to understand a bit better is that we are not talking about an idea anymore, which someone is going to do in the future, but instead we also need to keep in mind that as Hubcheck we already have invested in the last years setting up and operating such a V2G root CA. And so we and all the partners we have closely worked with, so therefore of course it's not only us, it's also a lot of our partners who have supported us on this. We made it happen to already have such a productive root CA in place. And as we all know, this is already being used in the market by different OEMs, different charging network operators, and every day more companies are jumping on the plug and charge train, so to say. But as mentioned already, and I think that's something I would definitely agree, of course, a more mature market requires more competition. So therefore, of course, we encourage other companies also joining this market, setting up a V2G root CA, operating V2G root CA. But I think what we need to understand a bit jointly in the market, that setting up a technical solution is a different thing than operating a very relevant security related system like a V2G root CA. And from our point of view, when we have started this activity some years ago, we also have seen that the technical perspective is relatively easy. It's still complex. We already have seen today a lot of very interesting slides with a lot of details. So everything of this needs to be taken into account. But I think the main challenge is to operate such a V2G root CA, that it will be trusted by the companies using this root CA for the next 5, 10, 15, in our case, 35 to 40 years even. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of doing so. Therefore, again, we encourage definitely that there are alternatives soon in the market, but let's keep in mind that we also need to agree on a joint approach how to operate these solutions, because in the end, security is not only a technical topic, it's also an organizational topic. It's based on specific guidelines and rules and regulations, not only about feelings. And I think that's something we also should do more jointly in the market, so that whenever there are different choices companies can choose from in regards of the root CA, then companies know, okay, all the root CAs, they are operating their systems in a similar way. So there's no security issue, for example, if I'm choosing to work with company A, B, or organization C in regards of the V2G root CA.
Thank you. There are some questions coming in by the audience, and one is, how are market forces going to be played out within CharIN? Maybe that's a question for Bonyat. So reducing costs, a bit of competition. Can you answer that question?
I actually have to maybe understand the question a bit more. What is exactly asked? So,
yeah, this is only a pop-up question, but I think I saw your email address in your presentation. So I can imagine that in many presentations, also by Jean-Marc and Joe, there was a fair and open framework for PKI development. And open is, of course, open entry, level playing field, but also keeping the costs of the PKI as low as possible, so consumers don't have to pay for the security, or they have to pay as little as possible. How are those forces, cost reduction, security, scalability, quality improvement, how are they embedded in the governance of CharIN? That's
actually,
my focus on this question by an attendee.
Understood now. Actually, we are in general still, let's say, really in the beginning of rolling this project at least out and defining the whole operational model, let's say. And of course, we said that we will have for sure some costs, but just since it's not a profit organization, we are not looking for any, let's say, fees beyond the cost coverage, for example. And but this is in general something that we have to evaluate still, assess still as a team, and also define. So it's a bit for me difficult to completely or concretely answer this question right now.
Okay, but thanks for the effort. Another question popped in, and maybe it was triggered by the European flag in Jean-Marc's last slide in the presentation. But a question for all the panelists: what are your expectations by the European Commission regarding the public key infrastructure? Jean-Marc, may you kick off?
Yes, okay. Yes, this is a good question, and for sure. Maybe we can say that we are waiting, or we are, willing about two main ideas. The first one, and we spent is that about monopoly situation. We spent several minutes talking about monopoly situation. Is there any real monopoly or not so real monopoly, and so on? This is a question very important for everybody, and so I think that the main first idea that we want to clarify with the STS subgroup is about this question. Do we prefer to have a very hierarchical structure with a single actor on the top, and based on that, who could be play this anchor role? Is it a public authority? Is it a consortium, or could it be a market player, and so on? So maybe I think that it could be a very interesting point that could be clarified within the STF subgroup to clarify, to exchange idea, and to clarify that. The second idea is that at the end we will define what I would call a trust area. So it means that we will define that all the actors that are able to be to have sub-CA or something like that under this V2G root CA will belong to the same trust area. And so I think that we have a very important question, which is who could be inside this trust area? What are the requirements? What are the conditions for a player to be part of this trust area? Do we accept anybody? It means that we may face some risk, cybersecurity risk, or do we accept only a very small numbers of actors? And we will not have an open situation. So we have to find the way to define very in a transparent way who will be part of this trust area, what are the conditions, and to be sure that these conditions, this requirement will bring us to a very open situation, an open market that could accept small actors, big actors, energy player, automotive, and so on. So the question, I mean, in my opinion, the most important point will be how to define the condition and the requirement to be part of the trust area.
Thank you very much. Joe, from your perspective, what would be the role of Brussels?
Yeah, thank you, Bart. I think I can maybe try to complete what Jean-Marc said, which was quite complete actually. What we also might expect, what is still needed in the framework. When we talk about the framework, multiple V2G routes or one V2G routes, we talk about a lot about governance and a role of an organization that is just keeping an eye on things, not being involved as an economical actor. So when we study the certificate trust list as a solution for interoperability, pops up the question about the trust list manager. Who can be the trust list manager? So who can be the trust list manager can be a question to be answered along with the European Commission. Perhaps it's a role that the European Commission itself can play as an operator of the trust list manager. So this is the kind of questions we hope we can discuss and try to work towards along with Europe.
Thank you. Baran, who is the trust list manager in your opinion? Should it be Brussels or maybe another company or organization?
There are some best practices in the market. So, for example, there's European Bridge CA. They are in Berlin. They are making this kind of things. From my perspective, I believe in free market, so it doesn't need to be an organization in European Union. This can be anybody. I mean, maybe again European Bridge CA.
Okay. Christian, I see you nodding a little bit. Is that yes, Brussels, or no, leave it up to the market players?
Yeah, very fair question. I think first I want to highlight again that it's great that so many companies are now working on implementing the open standard ISO 15108. I think that's great to see, and that's exactly what we need as the EV charging market, that the main stakeholders are using open and neutral standards. So therefore, I think that's great, and that's definitely one of the big messages we should share a bit often, that the majority of the market is now relying on this open standard. In addition, I think that's a very good question. Who could support us to maybe reduce a bit the typical European complexity, I would say, because of course we have seen in the last years that when we talk about e-mobility and when we talk about roaming, that there was high level of complexity by different stakeholders and companies involved, and I'm not sure if that was in every case really needed. So therefore, we definitely appreciate if we can find a joint solution, and keeping in mind that neutrality can be defined differently depending on the perspective, because maybe my definition of neutrality is slightly different from the definition of Bonyard and Joe and Jean-Marc and Baran, and maybe even different from your definition, Bert. I think a good step would be to ask the European Commission if they can help us as the European market by, for example, as mentioned by Joe, becoming the European trust list operator, so that they are defining joint rules how to make it happen. Unfortunately, and I think that's one of the risks we need also to flag, the European Commission is not yet known as a very fast and agile organization. So therefore, we need to see if that's really helping us, if we are now waiting for 1, 2, 3 more years until something has happened on the European level, or if you're using the time already in between to make things move in the right direction, and then maybe handing over an existing solution to the European Union as a kind of new owner or new operator. I think that would be a great approach, because again, I think it's great that the whole European, even international market is agreeing on the value of ISO 15108 and on the value of plug and charge as one of the first use cases. But of course, we need to avoid that there's any insecurity in regards of investments, because that will harm the whole market again. And therefore, we definitely would vote as subject for a solution which is reflecting the actual needs, but also the needs in the future. And therefore, we definitely think it would be valuable to discuss a potential role of the European Commission. But in best case, it could happen quite quickly, which is maybe a bit too much to ask for, but let's see. And as we all know, there are right now a lot of discussions taking place on the European level in regards of the Sustainable Transport Forum, where I think all panelists are also involved, and including also us and then other companies as well. And I think that's exactly the plenum where we should discuss this question more often, if we can agree on making the European Commission a real neutral operator of such a certificate trust list, for example. Because then in the end, we can exactly achieve what we have discussed, freedom of choice, because we also believe that in the end, the more choices you have in regards of different services, the more relevant it is that companies need to prove their value by having a very good offering in place, a very stable offering, maybe a good, fair price-based offering. And I think that's something we will definitely see more of in the market, which is great. And we appreciate competition, because that also normally brings new innovations to the market. But of course, it should be done based on fair conditions on a neutral playground, so that there's no kind of negative impact on such a market development.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the market is not mature, is what you say. Therefore, it is a good thing that the European Commission is not that fast and agile, because we also need some time to innovate and develop. There was
sorry, but maybe not interrupted. Maybe I was understood wrongly, but I think the market is already in a more mature level. We're seeing every day that a new company is announcing that they're doing something with plug and charge based on ISO 15108. So therefore, I think we already have reached a relatively good level of maturity. Of course, we know that still there's room for improvement, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of changing something which is already being used by, let's say, 25–30% of the market, because we need to keep in mind these companies also have invested a lot of resources and time to make it happen, and therefore we shouldn't forget them as well in these kind of discussions.
Yeah, thanks for that addition. One of the questions by the audience is, what are the follow-up costs on the CharIN PKI if the scopes get extended? Bonyat, you had one last slide with what is in scope and potentially in scope, and one of the issues one of the attendees addresses is the pool interoperability and some others. Can you give your vision on the costs, but also maybe a little bit of the timing? When could the scope be extended?
Regarding the costs, I'm not sure if the colleague who asked this wants a concrete number right now from me. Even if I could, I can't give you a concrete number regarding the cost. We just evaluated it like roughly, like different, let's say, services which also CharIN could offer. But I can.
Yeah,
I
but
guess
maybe
I
not only
the
costs in euros, but also the costs in resources, because what you're doing is building a platform with many organizations. I heard 20 nowadays, but maybe you would like to extend that. And of course, these organizations have their input in man hours.
Exactly. So in general, as Christian already said, the operation, I think, for a PKI or also of other services like the pools will be the, let's say, more difficult or heavier part on that. And in man hour, it's difficult to say because also that we didn't evaluate yet. We are discussing it. to extend the scope, and that would be, for example, the pool services, but also the sub CA2 with issuing certificates and so on. But right now, I cannot give you a more concrete answer on that. What we are considering in general is Hubject is right now the only operator of those ecosystem services, I would call them now. So is the only operator of the pools, for example. And we are kind of waiting a bit still for the market, how it will go. So we are still leaving it to the open market. And we are expecting that more players will join the market, operating, for example, those pools. And that's why we are kind of waiting still. So we are having the different services in our mind still, but I think it's too early to decide now. Will we extend the scope and evaluate then, okay, what do we have to define, what will be the costs, and so on. So if the market situation should not change in the next, let's say, 6-7 months, so we are focusing right now really only on the B2G route and the PKI. But if we should see in the next couple of months that the market situation is not changing, and if there really should be the need of more operators except of Hubject, for example, then we of course will go back, and maybe it will be some kind of follow-up project, or we will extend this project and then figure really out what is needed. But in general, I expect the resources to kind of maybe double or triple even. But this is really my estimation right now. We didn't really assess it in detail.
Yeah, so a lot of work and a decision to be made in the future. Decision probably to be made by CharIN members, but there might also be an external push request from the market from the non-members. There's a last question towards Christian. Will Hubject bid for CharIN becoming a request for proposal for a technical PKI? Maybe a brief answer if you can.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, Bart.
Oh, there was a question from the
No,
audience.
just kidding. I think that this is a public tender, so everyone was invited to participate, and I think the whole industry will be very excited to see what are the results out of the tender. So, Bonyard, please make it happen as soon as possible.
We are at it.
Bonyard, you're challenged.
But in general, one thing I also want to add, obviously CharIN as an association, and this is also part of the, let's say, operating topic. CharIN as an association is currently, let's say, not really designed to operate such a PKI, especially including those pools and services only by itself. So there will be for sure resources that will be needed. Either it will be provided by the PKI provider, by the project team, or just sourced by a completely different third party. That just said, and that is why we are still like working on it, defining which are the best option, or what is the best option to operate this PKI. And as Christian, again, I have to mention it said, it's obviously not that easy of a topic. So we are at it, and especially I try my best to get this done and defined and implemented as soon as possible, and give Christian an answer as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean-Marc, do you want to add something on this question?
About Hubject, no, but a point, in my opinion, a point has to be pushed and clarified. I mean that the role of V2G root CA is a bit special, and this role needs some governance and external governance, because there is a crucial situation of this actor in the ecosystem. But about the pool managing, about the CPS actors, which is a signature role, very technical things. And same for the for the sub-CI number 2, the leaf certificate issuing. Those activities are not so crucial. Don't have the same position, and so we have to focus about governance on the root CA and the root CAs, because we can have several, but we have to promote a very open market for technical services. I mean, pool management, CPS activities, sub-CA 2. Leaf certificate issuing and so on, because those activities has to be aligned with the global certificate policy, but there is no very big governance impact and constraints about that. So be sure to focus on what is important in terms of governance, and on the other side, be sure that the market is fully open when we are talking about IT services or technical services. And those two things has to be separated. And I mean that we have to differentiate those two kinds of services. Pool management, for example, and V2G root CA. There are two different things.
Thank you very much.
I fully agree on that, and sorry, I just wanted to add, and I think Jean-Marc just explained it better than I could before. Probably I tried it the same, and this is why CharIN is focusing on the V2G route, because it's a governance topic or issue at this place, and the rest is kind of left to the open market. And I think also, especially from a business perspective, when you look at the sub-CA 2, which is issuing the certificates, or maybe even the pool services, those are where the private companies, I think, can enter the market under, in the best case from our perspective, under the CharIN PKI or under the CharIN V2G route.
Okay, thank you very much. We're almost heading towards the closing of this session. And are there any last remarks by these panelists? Then I would like to wrap up a little bit.
Maybe if I can say something.
Sure,
Yeah, sorry,
Joe.
Yeah, no, just in a couple of words, please make it happen. We are working on the enablers of interoperability, certificate trust list, or whatever. These are just the enablers, let's say, but please make it happen. Operate the solutions, deploy them, CharIN, Object, others, make it happen, because we are not waiting, actually. We are moving forward. Our Mobena partners are moving forward, developing, and we are all expecting this solution to happen in the early future. So yes, let's all move forward with this.
Yeah, not much to add. I also just want to second the opinion of Joe. I think we have shown already, especially with the CTL workshop we did some weeks ago together with Joe and his team, Vedicom, ELAD as well, that things can be done jointly in a much better way than if everyone is trying to do it independently. So I think there we have shown things can be done much better, much faster if we are all focusing on the same goal. And I think that's something we should also continue doing, make it happen, that the whole European/international market is using similar standards, because that needs to be the main goal, that we all relying on open and neutral standards. And then, of course, we can offer different services and products based on this. But maybe just to give you another example of why we also should be a bit careful, because too much choice is maybe also a challenge by itself. And we already have heard today the example of websites. And just keep in mind that when you are setting up a website by yourself, normally you are not creating the certificates, making the communication to your website more secure. And I think that's also a bit the example we should keep in mind for Plug and Charge. Yes, and in a lot of cases, it totally makes sense to do everything by yourself. And that's exactly what is possible, even with the existing object solution. But in most cases, I think also things are that complex that you should rely on an expert and then just pick and choose the services you would like to have in place. I think that's what we will see more often in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, all the panelists for your time, and the presenters for the presentations. As mentioned earlier, we're moving in the right direction. There is debate on what is neutrality, what is choice. One remark was we must prevent monopoly, but we also must open up the market for new technical solutions, facilitate the open market. The Mobena Initiative, the task for PKI and the plug-in charge by CharIN are doing their own thing, but are aligning as well. So that's the move in the right direction. We're not there yet. And of course, we have the European Commission in focus. They're not needed yet as a regulator, but interoperability is a European thing, so it's healthy. They keep a close watch. Klaas, thank you very much. Thank you very much for CharIN to facilitate again a very interesting webinar. These were my closing remarks. Maybe some last words by you. You're unmuted.
Nothing special to add, but to say thanks to all of you. I know that costs you 1.5 hours. Thanks to the listeners. I followed the discussion and I'm quite positive out of that, so that we are not on a conflict, so we are on the same path. But whatever we do, we have to care for the customer, as I mentioned, and so he must like it. And we need to have the solution in the market soon, because that is just simple expectation. And when we have the pilot applications from Christian, that helps a lot in the market preparation. And whatever we find in the future, we will see. And yeah, thanks to all speakers, talkers, moderators, preparation. Ms. Füllers or Ms. Muller was preparing that. Thanks for setting that up. And I assume we will see us in the same round sometimes, and at least when we are going to a festival and checking that application on site with cars and chargers. So that will be the final proof for it. And yeah, I wish you a good soccer game event tonight. So we followed the others. I don't speak about any nationalities, Barte. I don't speak about any nations who are successful and more or less. And so we push the thumbs for tonight that the best may win. So thanks. See you.
Thank you very much.